over to you.
All right. Please welcome our next speaker, Wen-Fai Fong, who is no stranger to the CFA, having earned her PhD from Harvard in 2014. Prior to that, she received double bachelor's degrees in physics and biology at MIT. After Harvard, she was an Einstein Fellow at the University of Arizona and a Hubble Fellow at Northwestern, and she has been at Northwestern since then as faculty. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter, and to the rest of the organizers for having me. I was scrolling through the participants and see so many familiar faces and names from grad school. So it's really great to be back, and I hope to come back and visit. We were discussing pizza earlier, and I would definitely take Armando's over any other Chicago deep dish. So I really have good memories of the CFA. So today I'm going to focus on neutron star mergers and a particular aspect of neutron star mergers, their kilonova emission. I know this audience, the CFA, is no stranger to neutron star mergers. There's a lot of great ongoing research. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of recent results from my group that kind of complements the picture happening with gravitational waves. So this image is the host galaxy of GW 170817, the first binary neutron star merger. And so this is like a beautiful, one of the most beautiful images. And so exciting to just realize the promise of these very nearby gravitational wave detected neutron star mergers. But really my reality for the past, many years has been looking at more distant events, short gamma ray bursts that also come from neutron star mergers. And so these are the types of host galaxy environments that I typically study. So the idea of this talk is to try to figure out how to kind of extract the most from this population while we wait for gravitational wave observatories to come back online. So the upshot of these types of systems are we have two neutron stars or a neutron star and a black hole. They are over millions and billions of years and spiraling onto each other, producing eventually an accreting black hole. But in the meantime, it's a really kind of dynamic process in which they're releasing gravitational waves the entire time. They have dynamical ejecta at about the 10th speed of light that produces heavy elements. And then eventually they go on to produce a black hole and with a transient accretion disk that powers a relativistic transient that we see as short gamma ray bursts. So they're really dynamic and colorful systems. And in particular, there's two main components and outflows that are important in understanding neutron star mergers. One is this kilonova emission, which comes out in the optical and near infrared. And this is due to the radioactive decay of heavy elements produced in the merger. In particular, this process involves the rapid capture of neutrons onto heavy seed nuclei and the radioactive decay of those isotopes. So often it's called an R process kilonova due to that rapid capture. And then we have the short gamma ray burst, which we've known and loved for a long time. And this actually is synchrotron emission, a non-thermal transient that comes from the interaction of the jet with the surrounding environment. And this afterglow emission is broadband detectable in radio through X-ray wavelengths. So really I'll focus most of this talk on this kilonova emission and what we can learn from short gamma ray bursts. So what can we learn from kilonovae in general? Why bother studying them? Well, we can learn about the origin of heavy R process elements, for instance, what's in this person's teeth, and try to reproduce the solar R process abundance patterns that we see, in particular, the so-called third R process peak, and the lanthanides are difficult to reproduce with core collapse supernovae alone. Of course, if you understand the origins of heavy elements, you can understand more about the impact of their environment on the chemical evolution of individual galaxies and in the context of the history of the universe. We can understand, the kilonova cloud basically exists. They are kind of slowly moving compared to that relativistic jet that punches through. So we can understand more of the nature of that interaction. And finally, two neutron stars, I've said they produce a black hole, but it's possible they could actually produce, at least temporarily, a hypermassive neutron star that will have an impact on the kilonova signal that we see. And so by identifying kilonovae, we can try to understand potentially what is the maximum mass achievable of neutron stars and more about the equation of state. Those are just some reasons why kilonovae are exciting. So first I want to introduce kilonovae and some observational considerations, then go into a couple of results from short gamma ray bursts. If I have time at the end, I'll talk a bit about the Saguaro survey, which is a population of GW detected mergers and associated follow-up. All right, so this is really an observational golden era for mergers. Again, as I've alluded to, we've been able to find short gamma ray bursts for a long time, thanks to very recent, well, actually not very recent, the last 15, 20 years, the NASA's SWIFT and Fermi satellites. Really, SWIFT has been the pioneer in terms of localizing these short gamma ray bursts really well, but they provide a kind of large cosmological population. Whereas LIGO, Virgo, upcoming CAGRA, gravitational wave observatories really give us the opportunity to study these from a different angle, literally for the first time, and also a very local population. And so these are extremely complementary streams. And this is just the redshift distribution of short gamma ray bursts extending to 1.5 or so, and gravitational waves really sit here. And so while short gamma ray bursts definitely win in quantity, we can learn also a lot, as we've seen from gravitational wave events. And some observational considerations as we dive into understanding kilonova emission from short gamma ray bursts. When we're on axis, this is just for a classical short gamma ray burst that's cosmological, we have these two components. The afterglow, which is typically just a power law that decays in flux. And it's the first thing we see, it's that relativistic outflow. And then the kilonova comes a little bit later. Typically this transition happens on day timescales. The peak happens on a week or so. And really we've relied very heavily on the Hubble Space Telescope for identifying kilonovae and short gamma ray bursts, just because they're extremely faint. This was realized back when I was a graduate student at the CFA, the first kind of, I'd say, bona fide photometric excess following a short gamma ray burst, where you can see this, there's a red square right here is basically what we associate with the kilonova, and it was matched at the time to the state-of-the-art kilonova models that were there. And so a lot of this game is kind of identifying these photometric excesses following short gamma ray bursts. And one thing is that it's really difficult to get spectroscopy of these because they are extremely faint. You can see absolute magnitudes of -15. So, much, much fainter than classical supernovae. Just to put this into context, for those who studied GW detected mergers, for gravitational wave detections, the gravitational waves don't care where the jet is pointed, unlike the gamma ray satellites. And so we actually, more than often than not, will see them off axis. And this has grave observational considerations. We'll actually see that kilonova emerge first. And then due to relativistic beaming, the relativistic jet is delayed and it will come into our view eventually. And the afterglow will emerge weeks to month timescales, but it really depends on the properties of the actual jet and also the observing angle. And so you can kind of see that the tables are turned for in terms of the role of observatories. And so the promise of this was realized with GW 170817. This is Ashley Villar's beautiful compilation paper and this is just the kilonova. So this is nuts compared to that one data point I showed you for short gamma ray bursts. And then if you just kind of zoom out with the kilonova and afterglow, you can see the kilonova is much brighter and the afterglow will come out a little bit later. So this is a type of game for GW detected mergers. We'll focus the rest of the talk on short gamma ray bursts. And then this is just a slide made by my student Jillian Rastinajad, which basically depicts that when two neutron stars merge, they can produce kind of any number of outcomes. This is kind of the most favored outcome into a black hole. But if a neutron star temporarily survives, it can actually impart neutrino luminosity that can inhibit the production of those really heavy elements and cause the ejecta to be more blue, or at least the colors of the transient arising to be more blue. Of course, if you have a neutron star and black hole, it can't produce a heavier neutron star, and so it goes into a black hole. So generally, neutron star black holes are expected to have, for instance, redder ejecta. And so each of these kind of different outcomes will translate into different observables, different light curves, different behaviors. And so specific outcomes really depend on the binary progenitor, the remnant. So for instance, whether a black hole or neutron star is formed, the nuclear physics, and the viewing angle dependence. And so the goal really for the next couple of studies I'll present is to confront the diversity of outcomes with existing data. Of course, we always have to kind of be rooted in reality. So this ground truth is this beautiful GW 170817 kilonova. And I'm sure you all know this extremely well. These are just a couple of example studies demonstrating the rapid spectral and color evolution of this beautiful event. And so again, while short gamma ray bursts can't compete in data quality, they can shatter the playing field in quantity. Okay, so this leads me to the next section, constraints from a large sample of short gamma ray bursts. So this is work led by my second year PhD student, Jillian Rastinajad. So she led a sample of looking for optical and infrared observations of 85 swift short gamma ray bursts. This was a comprehensive catalog over 15 years of swift operations. This included a lot of very large telescope data. So this is just to highlight that, you know, we kind of threw our best and brightest at it, that these are extremely faint sources. And so we need the largest telescopes to conduct this science. And this was just a uniform analysis in the context of a diverse set of kilonova models spanning orders of magnitude in luminosity, and also rooted in our ground truth of GW 170817. And so these are just light curve models matched to the various data sets that we have. These are all upper limits here. So we're very interested in understanding what constraints we can place on the diversity of kilonova models out there. And this is GW 170817's light curve highlighted in blue. And you can see that, you know, there's different temporal behaviors, different rest frame wavelength behaviors. And so to actually normalize all of that and put these all on one plot, we created this, Jillian created this ratio plot, where basically this is a ratio of the short gamma ray burst observation over the luminosity of 170817 at that time and in that rest frame wavelength. So this essentially kind of normalizes all of the observations such that each of these observations can be independently compared to this one-to-one line. And so more explicitly, you know, observations above this one-to-one line are brighter than the counterpart of GW 170817, below which they're fainter. And so one thing I'll immediately point out is that the kilonova candidates that we found for short gamma ray bursts, and they're highlighted in green, are generally overall brighter than those of GW 170817. This might naturally be explained by an observational bias. It's easier to find more brighter events, but also potentially our viewing angle can also impact the type of colors of the ejecta that we see. Another thing I'd like to point out are these highlighted in red, where some of the deep upper limits rule out kilonovae with the same luminosity. So kind of these two populations already demonstrate a clear diversity in the kilonova emission by an order of magnitude in luminosity or more in the known population. And so this is just kind of a known but confirmed with a large catalog. One thing we're really interested in actually is, this is basically a cumulative distribution of this, but compared with different models. So this blue line is the ratios of 170817, and then also a couple of different models, a neutron star black hole model, and also if we entertain an indefinitely stable remnant forming. And so we're really interested in this population here, basically understanding, you know, what can we rule out from in the context of different models, given these short gamma ray burst observations. And so I won't go into too much more detail with this analysis, but we have a lot of other different models that we look at in this paper and confront use a large catalog in that way. One kind of way to test the physical properties is to ask what are the ejecta masses and ejecta velocities in the context of known models that we can actually parameterize. And so this diagram is just that parameter space going from red to blue, and essentially exploring kind of a typical kilonova component, a bluer one, and an extremely blue one. And you can see that, and these are all upper limits. So the way this diagram works is that this kind of redder space is ruled out, whereas this is still a fair game. And about 14 of our short gamma ray bursts enter this parameter space. So you can see that as we go to bluer components, it's no surprise that more short gamma ray bursts have more constraining power. Just that's the nature of our given observations. This is also a different set of models. So this one was a forward modeling based on analytic prescription, so we can get a lot more granular with our grid. But this is the case in all 2017 models, which actually are based on simulations, including time-varying opacities based on atomic data. As I said, as we move kind of from red to blue, short gamma ray bursts have more constraining power, which is no surprise. About 15% of our sample rules out ejected masses on par with GW 170817. You can see if you're paying attention that there's a little bits of shifts, particularly where AT 2017 GFO lies. And the values of the ejected masses are actually extremely model dependent. So if we want to start making inferences on, for instance, our process abundances and the contribution of neutron star mergers, we need to reconcile that extreme model dependence, which is a difficult problem. But this does overall demonstrates the promise of a large catalog of short gamma ray bursts and confronting these different models. See, I'm trying to see how I'm doing on time. Okay, and so then I'll just introduce the next result, which is the most potentially the most luminous kilonova we found, and this was from just in the past year. So back in May of 2020, and this was actually Ito's program here at the CFA, we triggered Hubble Space Telescope observations on a fairly nearby short gamma ray burst, redshift 0.5 or so. And we found that through a series of observations, we also had VLA observations as well, that we actually were able to tease out this transient source that was actually quite bright as seen by HST. When combined with multi-wavelength observations, so both with Swift XRT and the VLA, we found that throwing any normal afterglow power law models at this entire data set could not adequately explain the full data set. And so you can see that there's actually, in terms of the HST data points, they were just way too bright to be explained by a typical afterglow model. So we had to come up with some extra component to explain what was happening in the optical and infrared. Is that 17 minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. And so what we came up with is that when you compare this light curve of this short gamma ray burst, and this is in the optical, so this is luminosity versus time, it sits right here. And so these are typical short gamma ray burst afterglows at contemporary epochs, and these are radioactively powered kilonovae like GW 170817 and a couple other short gamma ray burst kilonovae that we found. And so you can see it's 10 times above any radioactively powered kilonova that we've seen, but well below those of traditional afterglows. So it lies in this kind of really uncomfortable parameter space. And so the model that we adopted for this was basically you have potentially two neutron stars, they merge and produce a hypermassive neutron star that acquires large magnetic fields during the merger process and dumps basically that spin down energy into behind the kilonova ejecta, drives an ionization front. Some of that goes into non-thermal X-rays, and some of that is thermalized in the optical and infrared. And that's the optical infrared component is what we see. And this can easily drive something that's 10 times larger than a traditional radioactively powered kilonova in terms of luminosity. And so if I were just like in it for glory, you could say things like it's the most luminous kilonova ever, or maybe the first signature of magnetar birth. And the press was all excited about that. But really, I think this kind of poses some kind of open questions that I've been thinking about. So from a science point of view, if this is actually a kilonova, this is kind of an unexpected outcome. The magnetars are fairly rare in the context of neutron star mergers. If we try to explain it by radioactively powered kilonovae, it really pushes the rates of heating rates. Why haven't we seen this kind of counterpart before? This also has implications for follow-up of future events. If they're 10 times brighter than what we think, then that's interesting. If it's not a kilonova, then we don't actually know what the emitting source is. And so that's also another just interesting science question to explore. Okay, I'll just, because I'm like short on time, I'll just kind of introduce this survey, and I'm happy to take questions in meetings and otherwise. But essentially this was a gravitational wave follow-up survey started by David Sand and myself at Arizona. And so this is a picture of Saguaro National Park that I took myself when I lived there. And of course, it has to have an acronym associated with it. So it searches after gravitational waves using Arizona observatories. And essentially we use, I'll just say the team, essentially we use the 1.5 meter Catalina Sky Survey telescope that's typically used for finding moving objects on Mount Lemmon that we commandeer every once in a while for follow-up. It's a 5 square degree imager and lots of follow-up. And I'll just say that we have some results from 03, which involves follow-up of 17 events, comprehensive coverage of them, or a wide kind of range of coverage. And we make some inferences on new candidates, but I'll basically leave it there and just say this is an observational golden era for mergers, and I'm very excited to see what surprises lie ahead. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wen-Fai, for a great talk. And anybody who has questions, if you want to raise your hand using the reactions button, or you can we can read off anything that you type into the chat. All right. While folks are maybe still thinking about what to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about the Saguaro follow-up program?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can. I don't know if I should reshare. Don't want to make people sit through too many more slides. But essentially, basically, this is kind of our footprint. So it's using the Catalina Sky Survey available data, and we developed deep reference images for over kind of 10 years of CSS data that provides, a nice way to identify any kind of new transient. And so this is 25,000 square degrees or so. And so what we did in LIGO Virgo 03 is we followed up 17 events that involved neutron star, actually most of which involved neutron stars. And we also looked for any what we call serendipitous follow-up. So not only triggered events, but also any CSS data that we had within 5 days. And so there's more that I can expand on there, but essentially, 1.5 meters and at the distances of LIGO events in 03 is really difficult. So we're exploring now going to larger facilities. Yeah. Seems like it was all clear.
Come on, folks, don't be shy. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, let's thank both of our speakers for a couple of really great talks. This is by far the highest attendance that we've ever had. And thank you all for attending, and hope to see you again next week. If you would like to speak with either of our speakers, there are sign-up sheets which are linked from the emails that have been sent to the CFA.
Cool.